to do just to tie up some loose ends is let's take a look at the Aruch HaShulchan together. You don't have it in the Sefer. He quoted just a snippet of it. I'm actually going to bring it up on the screen here, just for you to know. There's only Mishnah Berurah on Orach Chaim, as we've pointed out before, but the Aruch HaShulchan goes on all four sections of Shulchan Aruch. And that's why it's sort of like our go-to Sefer. Shin Ayin Ches, 378. And here I just loaded it up. Let me share my screen. I know that for people who are live here, this is not going to help you, but it's here in Sefaria. Sefaria, by the way, is a wonderful resource, and I highly recommend it, sefaria.org. You can bring up so many different Sfarim. There we go.
And you can download the whole library to your phone.
You can download the whole library to your phone, as Izzy just said. Okay, so let's take a look in these last few halachos of Siman Shin Ayin Ches 378 in Choshen Mishpat. And the Aruch HaShulchan writes as follows: Haya echad ratz b'reshus harabim ve'echad mahalech. One person is running and one person is walking in a public thoroughfare. V'huzak hamahalech b'ratz. And the walker gets injured by the runner. Runner comes, knocks into him, bumps into him, brushes against him, and this guy trips and falls or falls against something, gets injured, or his clothing gets damaged, right? So chayev mipnei sharat shelo birshus. The runner is liable because he's running without permission. She'ein larutz birshus harabim, v'dino kirishus hanizik. Because whenever you do an activity in a public thoroughfare that is not sanctioned by the public, so then you become the liable party. And it's as if you're going into someone else's private property and causing them damage. Now, he says, V'im huza karatz b'mahalech patur. Now, if the runner, however, gets injured by the walker, right? So the guy's running, and all of a sudden, the walker, without noticing that there's a runner behind him, decides to turn right, and all of a sudden, the runner can't stop in time and collides, and he trips and breaks his ankle or whatever it is. So in that situation, the walker is patur. Wa ela im kain hiziko b'chavana, unless he did it on purpose, right? Because he said, "Hey, what's this Meshugana running? Let me slow him down." Okay. L'Rashi, ula harambam eno chayv ela im kain hiziko b'kavana lahazik. And that's according to Rashi. Whenever there was knowledge that there was a guy running and you decided to take the law into your own hands, so then you're going to be liable if the guy gets injured. But according to the Rambam, you're only liable if you intentionally wanted to injure him. Let's say you just wanted to slow him down. And so you deliberately walked in front of him to block his path. But in the course of doing so, he couldn't stop in time, collided with you, and then he got injured. So then you would not be liable according to the Rambam. This is a machlokis Rashi and the Rambam. That's a good question. What if the guy says, if the guy's honest? The guy's honest, and it's a question of who's liable in this case. Guy broke his ankle, and I was just trying to get you to slow down. I didn't want to hurt you. That's what the guy says. So, taka, machlokis Rashi Rambam. Okay. V'chein hu l'deya shniya shebesif yud zayin v'amru chazal de'emasai mikri ratz b'rshus harabim shlo b'rshus bachol. And then he says, and furthermore, our sages tell us, when is a runner considered to be running without permission? He's considered to be running without permission during the week. Aval be'erev Shabbos samach l'Shabbos b'ratz b'inyane Shabbos. But if it's right before Shabbos and a guy is running like a meshuganer because he's got to get home, Mikri birishus, this is considered to be what the public sanctions, upater. And therefore, if in the course of his running he injures or damages, he's going to be pater. B'dafka bistam, and that's only when we have no other knowledge other than we see a guy running in his Shabbos clothes or trying to get home right before Shabbos. Kishalo yadanu al meratz talinan shelitzarach Shabbos ratz. Because if we can't figure out why he's running, we assume he's running because the sun's about to go down and he's a Shomer Shabbos. Aval im yadua shiritzaso eno litzarach Shabbos chayev kamo b'chol. But if we can ascertain that he's not running because it's because of Shabbos, he's running for some other reason, so then he's going to be just as liable as he would be any other time during the week. Amnam im haritza haisa afilu lishar inyanav ela shemerutzaso haisa kedei shelo yechalel Shabbat. If he's running for some purpose, and he's doing so that he won't be machalel Shabbos, mikri gam kein birishus, this is also called running with permission. He's getting the public sanction. Now, I just want to qualify this. This is, again, some disturbing, right? I believe, based on this language, that it all depends on the public's understanding or sort of sanction of people's activity. I don't think, first of all, that this certainly doesn't apply to speeding. Guy's got to get home in time for Shabbos, so he speeds into the neighborhood. No, that is not done with the sanction of the public. The public has not sanctioned that. The public does not say it's okay to zoom through the neighborhood just because it's Erev Shabbos. That's number one. Furthermore, it all depends on what is convention in your neighborhood. In the shtetl, where this is being written, everyone or most people were Jewish in your neighborhood, so it's understood, and people are from, so it's understood that people are going to be running around like Meshuggahers, right? 5 minutes before lich benching. So if you're concerned about the Meshuggahers, stay inside 5 minutes before lich benching and don't go outside. I think it's much harder to make that case in today's world, in today's modern world. I think it's harder to make that case. And I don't know that we would find such common scenarios where we could say, well, we have to exempt the guy because he was upset and not in his right mind because it was right before Shabbat. You have to come up with a scenario. Well, maybe
could you make it if it was in the shul itself?
Maybe in the shul itself, a guy's running to be able to say Kaddish.
Right.
But even then, Moshe is not happy. Even then, even if you're running to say Kaddish and you knock down the old man who's walking with his walker, that's not an excuse, because people don't expect that kind of behavior. Mm-hmm. It really depends on what people are expecting. You're in Mea Sharim Erev Shabbos. Okay, so maybe, yeah, right. It's not going to happen here. Okay, let me just do a few more lines. Mima she'amru Chazal deratz be'erev Shabbos havi b'rishus. He says, from the fact that Chazal say that running on Erev Shabbos is done with permission is granted by the public, ein lilmod mizeh. You should not infer from this that any kind of running for a mitzvah is done with the sanction of the community. The shiny Erev Shabbos is manobahu. Erev Shabbos is different. Aval b'sha'arei mitzvahs, and this is something that Rav Stern deliberated about. Is it specifically Erev Shabbos, or does it apply to other mitzvahs as well? Aval b'sha'arei mitzvahs, afshe mitzvah larutz, but for other mitzvahs, even though there's always a mitzvah to run with alacrity, with zrizus, to do a mitzvah, mikol makom ein lo larutz kol kach ad sheyuzak bo hamahalech. But no one's suggesting that there's such a mitzvah to run to do like it's virtuous to run to do a mitzvah. But don't run to do a mitzvah in an irresponsible way. You still have to assume responsibility if you end up damaging someone. So, in other words, this is almost like Choshen Mishpat is the mature part of Shulchan Aruch, right? It's basically saying, yeah, in Orach Chaim it says, When you wake up in the morning, be excited, run to do a mitzvah, run to shul. And by the time you get to Choshen Mishpat, you know what? Zaya mensch. Make sure that when you're running, you're not going to knock over the guy who's walking at a slower speed. Mihu beratz le'inyan pikuach nefesh o lahatzil min hadleko min hamayim v'chayotze bazeh. But if you're running to save a life, if you're running to put out a fire, or you're running because you need to put up sandbags because of the flood that's coming, so vadai demikri birishus, because so that's also called with the sanction of the public, the hachova alav larutz b'chol kocho v'lo gara me erev Shabbos, because that's no different from running on erev Shabbos. It's certainly no worse, and it's probably even better, because nothing stands in the way of pikuach nefesh. And so therefore, if in the course of trying to save a life, you end up in a collision, there is more of an argument to say you're putter. But again, with Rav Stern's caveat, provided that you're not driving like a crazy man, that you're still driving at a reasonable speed where you can control the vehicle. And that's a subjective issue. That's really there's some gray there. What is considered with reasonable speed? He says, as long as you're within or slightly above the speed limit. That's the way he quantified it. Okay. Next. Kamo she'ein reshus la'adam larutz beraglav birshus harabim, kamo chein ein lo reshus larutz yoter midai kisherochev al sus or yoshev ba'agala. Just like you can't run excessively in the public thoroughfare, you cannot be riding a horse or a wagon, right? This is still written before, horseless wagons, right? The imratz kolkach ad shehizik adamo behema v'kelim chayiv l'shalim. And if you're going so fast on your horse or in your wagon that you injure people or you injure property, then you have to pay. Kamo shehizik begufo, no different from as if you had damaged them by colliding them into them with your body. And then he says, Umaisa bishnayim shal yirochvim al susim, uba echad me harochvim achore hasus shel harochev hasheni. He brings an interesting scenario, which is not normal for the Aruch HaShulchan, but he says, you have two people that were once riding a horse. Each one was riding on his respective horse. One of the riders came along behind the second horse, upaga besuso vihika es hasus, and he tried to whip the other guy's horse, ad shenifchas midama, to the point where the horse was injured and its value was reduced. It's not clear why he was whacking the other guy's horse, maybe to get it to slow down, maybe to get it to speed up. We don't know the circumstances, but one guy on the horse is hitting the horse of the other guy, injures the horse as a result. And upasak harash zal dechayev l'shalim kol mashi yashumu hapchas shenifchas machmas hakazu. And the Rosh Paskin, that's like crashing your car into someone else's car, right? That's you are liable for damages to that other guy's horse. Aval yoter mizeh ein tzarach l'shalem afilu haya hasus hanizok shel kuti. And so he says, but you don't have to pay more than the damage, the depreciation in value of the horse. You don't have to pay more than that, even if the damagee, even if the guy riding the horse that was damaged is a non-Jew. V'harochev alav yishalim lo yoter mishavyo mipnei almuto, and mikol makom hamazik ein sarach l'shalem yoter mehapechat. He says that it could be that the rider wants to assess a higher amount because I think this is what he's saying, is that he wants to get us either the Gentile is an influential, strong guy, and he's trying to extract more money. Mikol makom hamazik ein sarach l'shalem yoter mehapachata b'meshe hakuti yotze meharochev shelo kedin eino rak kigrama ba'alma. Oh, I think what he's saying is that even though maybe a new horse is going to cost more money, you only have to pay for the reduction in value of the horse that you damaged. Even though the guy's gonna have to pay more, you don't have to pay more for a new horse. He says, now what if you have a scenario where a guy's riding or sitting in a wagon and his wagon goes ahead or horse goes ahead and collides with someone else. And the rider is saying, I wasn't exceeding the speed limit. It's not my fault, but this guy came into the intersection in an abnormal way, and I couldn't put my brakes on in time. So what are you going to do in that situation? Of course, this is all with riding a horse, but you can apply this to cars as well. And because of that, both parties or one party was injured. So then the guy who's accused of speeding just has to take a shavua. He has to take an oath in court that indeed he was not exceeding the speed limit, and that this guy came and blocked traffic abnormally and came into the intersection when he wasn't supposed to. So then he'll be patur. V'chein hizik kli v'toin shabal hakli ha'amida shelo b'makom haroi lahamida barachov nishba heseit v'niftar. And similarly, if I'm riding or walking in a public thoroughfare and I damage someone's vessel that wasn't supposed to be there, I'm also going to be patur. And sometimes the owner will say, no, I had permission to be there. And I say, no, you didn't. So if he's claiming that he had permission and I claim he didn't, I just have to take a shavua that it wasn't supposed to be in the road, and I will be patur. And if there are witnesses, have the witnesses testify what the scenario was. And that's why we have, cameras today. Cameras are so important, for to be able to verify what exactly happened. And a lot of times it's very unclear who's at fault. And that's why many municipalities have no fault insurance for that very reason. It's very difficult to ascertain who's at fault. And sometimes, they say you're 70% at fault and you're 30% at fault. Okay, that's why it's such a complicated business. Now, he says, aval kishehizik behema chayif b'chol inyan, di'ef shelabal habehema leilech achar behemto. If I'm riding in a public thoroughfare and I injure an animal, guy runs over a dog or a cat, so then the driver is going to be liable in all cases. And it's the driver's responsibility to make sure that he doesn't hit a dog or a cat. Now that's or an animal. And the reason is because you can't expect, he says, an animal owner to follow his animal everywhere. Now that could change based upon the animal. It could change based upon the norms of society. Obviously, a cat or a dog, rather see it happen to a cat. A cat runs into a street without any warning and I'm driving along and I didn't see it, I cannot be held liable. There are places where they don't allow animals to be running in the street. But they give it over to a shepherd. In other words, there were certain shtetelach that if you had sheep, if you had cows, they wouldn't allow them to go in the main street because there were wagons and there were people that were walking with carts and things like that, and the animals were a nuisance, so they would ban them. They would say, if you need to let your animal roam, give it over to a shepherd, and they would pay the shepherd a few kopecks, and that would be how you babysat your animal. And in those scenarios, if the animal runs into the street and gets injured, then whoever did the injury is going to be pater. Imlo shehizik bekavana, unless he injured the animal deliberately. Ula harambam bekavana nezek, and according to the Rambam, it has to not only be deliberately, it's got to be for the objective of injuring the animal. In that scenario where the animals are not granted permission to walk in the street, to roam in the street, so then if an animal gets injured on the street, so then the damager is not going to be liable.
Nowadays, you have a dog and the dog goes away. You have to have the dog in a leash. So basically, you are responsible if your dog goes to the street and you hit the dog.
Correct.
The owner
Correct.
of the dog.
The owner of the dog has to assume responsibility. Not only that, but what happens if you own a cat and I run over the cat and it gets caught in my engine because my engine sucks it up for whatever reason, which I've heard happening. A guy told me he once ran over a cat and it got stuck in his whole engine. And it cost him a lot of money to get it unstuck. So that could be a potential.
That sounded like a catastrophe, Rabbi.
Oh, good one, Paul. Good one. Very good. Now, granted, this fellow he admitted to me that he hated cats and he deliberately ran over it, which I could never, I was shocked when he told me that. I just couldn't imagine someone being so cruel, but he was a cruel guy. But it's conceivable that if I accidentally run over a cat and it gets caught up in my whole engine, and it costs me a couple grand to get my engine fixed, then the owner of the cat is going to be liable in that kind of scenario.
Or you try to avoid hitting the cat and you crash your car against another.
Yeah, that's also possible. It's also possible. Now, in that scenario, that's a little bit less clear because the cat owner could say, "Who told you to swerve? Hit the cat." Okay, last halach, and then we'll call it a day. B'makom shenohagim lischot be'eit simcha larutz v'lirkov al susim kamo shahaya haminhag bizman kadmon. There used to be a custom that when you would go to a wedding, you would have, they talk about the shtick that they do, at a wedding. So one of the shtikalach that they used to do in the medieval world is that they would have young bacharim riding on horses and like jousting at the wedding for sport and for entertainment. Okay, shabacharim rachavu al susim likrat hachatan. Not really jousting. The bacharim would ride out on horses to greet the groom. That was, and then bum 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 bum, like the really that kind of thing. V'haya darkam larutz, and they would gallop to greet the groom and say, they're singing Od Yishama. They didn't have Od Yishama like we have today, but they were singing, right? And they would come to greet the groom. This was a sign of honor. This was a sign of simcha. Bihiziku ze et ze, mamon shel chavero derech simcha uschok. And in the course of the frolicking and the joy, the merrymaking, one guy's horse injures another guy's horse. V'chein b'shari devar simcha. And in other situations where in the course of a simcha, you end up injuring someone else. There's on the dance floor, and one guy steps on the other guy's foot, on the other guy's ankle, he breaks his ankle. It happens, unfortunately, right? Things happen on the dance floor. That's why I stay away a lot of times. A lot of times these guys are crazy. The guys that are on the dance floor, they think that they're in a mosh pit in the 90s because they never experienced the punk rock scene, so they want to relive it at a from simcha. V'chein b'sha'arei devar simcha, or other types of simcha, kugon simchas Torah upurim, and other situations, let's say simchas Torah, Purim, where people are frolicking and people get injured. If the norm is for that kind of activity to go on, and you voluntarily go into that public space where people are doing that kind of activity, so then they can claim I was doing what I did through Rishus, and therefore I'm going to be pater. Umikol makom im nira lebeistin lasos geder v'siyag l'chayev hamazik. But let's say the Basin says, look, this is getting out of hand. We've got to make an example out of one of the perpetrators of damage to make sure that this is going to stop. So the Basin, at their discretion, harashus biyadim, they have permission to assess damages on a guy who went way over the top. He says, Kikama kilkulim yotzim mizeh, because many negative things will occur, many damaging things will occur if the Beis Din sort of turns an eye and doesn't do anything when these kinds of raucous activities are taking place. So it's really at the discretion of the Beis Din of the locality. If they feel that this was just play and it wasn't over the top and it was just, a guy got into the middle of the circle and or the horses were galloping and it was an innocent mistake that the horse kicked up a pebble and it hurt the other horse and it tripped or whatever and it broke its leg. So then there's no reason to make an assessment. But if the Beis Din sees that things are going way out of hand, so you have to be careful. There's a minhag in some places where they put the chassan on a table and then they pick up the table and they have the guy dancing on the table. I heard a case, someone told me it was a true story where a guy fell off the table, sustained a head injury, and was never normal after that. And so you have to exercise caution at these simchas because, and again, we're all a product of how old we are. We're all middle-aged dudes. I guess if I was learning this with some yeshiva bachrim, they probably would think that there's nothing wrong with it and it's perfectly fine. What are you talking about? We're careful. We know what we're doing. Yada da da da. But those of us who have been around a little bit know that that you're not immortal just because you're 25, and you have to be careful. And ultimately, a person can be held liable if it's a behavior that's not considered normal, that's not expected. Okay, so this is where we'll hold it for today. Any questions, comments? Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
You said something that it's according to the age, but what about for them it's okay? It's like
for them it's it's known that in certain, when you go to certain weddings, these guys who are dancing like crazy men, a middle-aged guy or an older person should not be going in that circle. Yeah, sometimes the smaller kids go in the circle. They should know better, and the parents should make sure that they don't go in, the small kids, and go into those circles. Because kids can get injured also.